Chapter 2, Spinner's End. Many miles away, the chilly mist that had pressed against the Prime Minister's windows drifted over a dirty river that wound between overgrown, rubbish-strewn banks. An immense chimney, relic of a disused mill, reared up, shadowy and ominous. There was no sound apart from the whisper of the black water, and no sign of life apart from a scrawny fox that had slunk down the bank to nose hopefully at some old fish and chip wrappings in the tall grass. But then, with a very faint pop, a slim, hooded figure appeared out of thin air on the edge of the river. The fox froze, wary eyes fixed upon this strange new phenomenon. The figure seemed to take its bearings for a few moments, then set off with light, quick strides, its long cloak rustling over the grass. With a second and louder pop, another hooded figure materialized. "Wait!" The harsh cry startled the fox, now crouching almost flat in the undergrowth. It leapt from its hiding place and up the bank. There was a flash of green light, a yelp, and the fox fell back to the ground, dead. The second figure turned over the animal with its toe. "Just a fox," said a woman's voice dismissively from under the hood. "I thought perhaps a Narcissi, wait." But her quarry, who had paused and looked back at the flash of light, was already scrambling up the bank the fox had just fallen down. "Sissy Narcissa, listen to me." The second woman caught the first and seized her arm, but the other wrenched it away. "Go back, Bella. You must listen to me." "I've listened already. I've made my decision. Leave me alone." The woman named Narcissa gained the top of the bank, where a line of old railings separated the river from a narrow, cobbled street. The other woman, Bella, followed at once. Side by side they stood looking across the road at the rows and rows of dilapidated brick houses, their windows dull and blind in the darkness. "He lives here?" asked Bella in a voice of contempt. "Here? In this Muggle dunghill? We must be the first of our kind ever to set foot." But Narcissa was not listening. She had slipped through a gap in the rusty railings and was already hurrying across the road. "Sissy, wait!" Bella followed, her cloak streaming behind, and saw Narcissa darting through an alley between the houses into a second, almost identical street. Some of the street lamps were broken. The two women were running between patches of light and deep darkness. The pursuer caught up with her prey just as she turned another corner, this time succeeding in catching hold of her arm and swinging her around so that they faced each other. "Sissy, you must not do this, you can't trust him." "The Dark Lord trusts him, doesn't he?" "The Dark Lord is, I believe, mistaken," Bella panted, and her eyes gleamed momentarily under her hood as she looked around to check that they were indeed alone. "In any case, we were told not to speak of the plan to anyone. This is a betrayal of the Dark Lords." "Let go, Bella," snarled Narcissa, and she drew a wand from beneath her cloak, holding it threateningly in the other's face. Bella merely laughed. "Sissy, your own sister. You wouldn't he?" "There is nothing I wouldn't do anymore." Narcissa breathed, a note of hysteria in her voice, and as she brought down the wand like a knife, there was another flash of light. Bella let go of her sister's arm as though burned. "Narcissa!" But Narcissa had rushed ahead. Rubbing her hand, her pursuer followed. Again, keeping her distance now, as they moved deeper into the deserted labyrinth of brick houses. At last, Narcissa hurried up a street named Spinner's End, over which the towering mill chimney seemed to hover like a giant admonitory finger. Her footsteps echoed on the cobbles as she passed boarded and broken windows, until she reached the very last house, where a dim light glimmered through the curtains in a downstairs room. She had knocked on the door before Bella, cursing under her breath, had caught up. Together they stood waiting, panting slightly, breathing in the smell of the dirty river that was carried to them on the night breeze. After a few seconds, they heard movement behind the door and it opened a crack. A sliver of a man could be seen looking out at them, a man with long black hair parted in curtains around a sallow face and black eyes. Narcissa threw back her hood. She was so pale that she seemed to shine in the darkness. The long blonde hair streaming down her back gave her the look of a drowned person. "Narcissa," said the man, opening the door a little wider, so that the light fell upon her and her sister too. "What a pleasant surprise." "Severus," she said in a strained whisper. "May I speak to you? It's urgent." "But of course." He stood back to allow her to pass him into the house. Her still hooded sister followed without invitation. "Snape," she said curtly as she passed him. "Bellatrix," he replied, his thin mouth curling into a slightly mocking smile as he closed the door with a snap behind them. They had stepped directly into a tiny sitting room, which had the feeling of a dark, padded cell. The walls were completely covered in books, most of them bound in old black or brown leather. A threadbare sofa, an old armchair, and a rickety table stood grouped together in a pool of dim light, cast by a candle-filled lamp hung from the ceiling. The place had an air of neglect, as though it was not usually inhabited. Snape gestured Narcissa to the sofa. She threw off her cloak, cast it aside, and sat down, staring at her white and trembling hands clasped in her lap. Bellatrix lowered her hood more slowly. Dark as her sister was fair, with heavily lidded eyes and a strong jaw, she did not take her gaze from Snape as she moved to stand behind Narcissa. "So, what can I do for you?" Snape asked, settling himself in the armchair opposite the two sisters. We are alone, aren't we?" Narcissa asked quietly. "Yes, of course." "Well, Wormtail's here, but we're not counting vermin, are we?" He pointed his wand at the wall of books behind him and with a bang, a hidden door flew open, revealing a narrow staircase upon which a small man stood frozen. "As you have clearly realized, Wormtail, we have guests," said Snape lazily. The man crept, hunchbacked, down the last few steps and moved into the room. He had small, watery eyes, a pointed nose, and wore an unpleasant simper. His left hand was caressing his right, which looked as though it was encased in a bright silver glove. "Narcissa," he said, in a squeaky voice. "And Bellatrix. How charming." "Wormtail will get us drinks, if you'd like them," said Snape. "And then he will return to his bedroom." Wormtail winced as though Snape had thrown something at him. "I am not your servant," he squeaked, avoiding Snape's eye. "Really? I was under the impression that the Dark Lord placed you here to Assist me. To assist, yes, but not to make you drinks and clean your house. I had no idea, Wormtail, that you were craving more dangerous assignments, said Snape silkily. This can be easily arranged. I shall speak to the Dark Lord. I can speak to him myself if I want to. Of course you can, said Snape, sneering. But in the meantime, bring us drinks. Some of the elf-made wine will do. Wormtail hesitated for a moment, looking as though he might argue, but then turned and headed through a second hidden door. They heard banging and a clinking of glasses. Within seconds he was back, bearing a dusty bottle and 3 glasses upon a tray. He dropped these on the rickety table and scurried from their presence, slamming the book-covered door behind him. Snape poured out 3 glasses of blood-red wine and handed 2 of them to the sisters. Narcissa murmured a word of thanks, whilst Bellatrix said nothing, but continued to glower at Snape. This did not seem to discompose him. On the contrary, he looked rather amused. The Dark Lord, he said, raising his glass and draining it. The sisters copied him. Snape refilled their glasses. As Narcissa took her second drink, she said in a rush, Severus, I'm sorry to come here like this, but I had to see you. I think you are the only one who can help me. Snape held up a hand to stop her, then pointed his wand again at the concealed staircase door. There was a loud bang and a squeal, followed by the sound of Wormtail scurrying back up the stairs. My apologies, said Snape. He has lately taken to listening at doors. I don't know what he means by it. You were saying, Narcissa. She took a great, shuddering breath and started again. Severus, I know I ought not to be here. I have been told to say nothing to anyone, but then you ought to hold your tongue, snarled Bellatrix. Particularly in present company. Present company, repeated Snape sardonically. And what am I to understand by that, Bellatrix? That I don't trust you, Snape, as you very well know. Narcissa let out a noise that might have been a dry sob and covered her face with her hands. Snape set his glass down upon the table and sat back again, his hands upon the arms of his chair, smiling into Bellatrix's glowering face. Narcissa, I think we ought to hear what Bellatrix is bursting to say. It will save tedious interruptions. Well, continue, Bellatrix, said Snape. Why is it that you do not trust me? 100 reasons, she said loudly, striding out from behind the sofa to slam her glass upon the table. Where to start? Where were you when the Dark Lord fell? Why did you never make any attempt to find him when he vanished? What have you been doing all these years that you've lived in Dumbledore's pocket? Why did you stop the Dark Lord procuring the Sorcerer's Stone? Why did you not return at once when the Dark Lord was reborn? Where were you a few weeks ago when we battled to retrieve the prophecy for the Dark Lord? And why, Snape, is Harry Potter still alive, when you have had him at your mercy for 5 years?